It was a quiet Wednesday morning in a sleepy Midwestern town, a place where everyone knew everyone. But beneath the calm streets, a darkness was about to emerge. At 7:45 a.m., the body of 17-year-old Emily Carter was discovered in her bedroom by her mother. There were no signs of forced entry. No obvious motive. Local law enforcement arrived quickly. The town was in shock. How could something so horrific happen here, in a community that prided itself on safety? Witnesses began to speak. Friends said Emily had been worried about someone following her. Her diary hinted at secret meetings and whispered threats. But the truth was more complicated than anyone imagined. By the end of the first day, investigators had a suspect. Someone who seemed to have the perfect alibi. Someone untouchable, or so it seemed. Rumors began to spread across the town. Who could have done this? And why? The answers, however, would not come easily. As the sun set over the quiet streets, the residents of this small town realized that the life they had always trusted was far more fragile than they ever imagined. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the wheels of justice were not turning as they should. From the outside, the investigation appeared thorough. Patrol cars lined the streets. Detectives worked long hours. Press briefings assured the public that progress was being made. But behind closed doors, the case was already beginning to unravel. The first mistake came early. The crime scene was not properly sealed. Friends, relatives, and even neighbors were allowed inside the house before forensic teams completed their work. Critical hours were lost. Emily's bedroom, where the crime occurred, held answers that would never be recovered. Footprints overlapped. Objects were moved. Small details that might have told the full story vanished forever. Investigators focused quickly on a single suspect. He was cooperative, calm, and well-connected in the community. His alibi came from people who worked for him, yet those statements were accepted without challenge. Other leads were quietly pushed aside. A neighbor reported hearing voices late that night. That report was never followed up. A friend mentioned strange messages Emily had received weeks before her death. Those messages were never traced. Then there was the diary. A small notebook Emily kept hidden in her room. It mentioned fear. It mentioned pressure. It hinted that someone close to her knew more than they should. The diary was logged as evidence, and then, inexplicably, disappeared. For weeks, no one could say where it was. When it resurfaced, several pages were missing. Inside the department, doubts began to grow. Some officers questioned the direction of the case. Others stayed silent, unwilling to challenge decisions made by those in power. As days turned into weeks, the urgency faded. Public attention slowed. And with each missed opportunity, the truth slipped further away. The town believed justice was coming. But in reality, the investigation was no longer about finding the truth. It was about closing the case. And when the case finally reached the courtroom, the consequences of those early failures became impossible to hide. The trial began nearly a year after Emily's death. By then, the town had changed. What once felt united was now divided, between those who wanted answers and those who wanted the case to disappear. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Reporters filled the back rows. Emily's family sat silently, holding on to hope that justice would finally speak. The prosecution laid out its case, but it was immediately clear something was missing. Evidence that once seemed promising was now incomplete. Timelines didn't align. Key forensic details were described vaguely, or not at all. Witnesses took the stand and hesitated. Some contradicted earlier statements. Others suddenly claimed they couldn't remember. One witness, who had once spoken openly to police, now refused to answer certain questions. The defense seized the moment. They pointed to the broken chain of evidence. They questioned the investigation itself. And slowly, they shifted the focus away from the accused and onto the victim. Emily was portrayed not as a teenager who had been failed, but as someone responsible for her own fate. The courtroom listened as her private life was dissected, while the gaps in the investigation were dismissed as minor errors. When the diary was mentioned, the room grew quiet. The missing pages were explained away as clerical mistakes. No one was held accountable. The jury looked exhausted, confused. They were asked to decide a life-altering verdict with half a story and unanswered questions. After days of deliberation, the verdict was read. Not guilty. The accused stood up, free to walk out of the courtroom. Emily's mother broke down. Her father stared straight ahead, motionless. In that moment, it became clear to everyone watching, this was not a failure of proof alone. It was a failure of the system. But while the courtroom closed its doors, the consequences of that verdict were only beginning. The courtroom emptied quickly after the verdict. Reporters rushed outside. Cameras followed the man who had just been declared free. Emily's family stayed behind, sitting in silence, left with questions that would never be answered. In the days that followed, the town tried to move on, but something had changed. Trust was broken. Conversations became careful. People avoided eye contact. Some residents defended the outcome. They said the system worked. Others disagreed. They believed the truth had been buried long before the trial ever began. Emily's parents refused to let her name fade into silence. They demanded internal reviews. They spoke at town meetings. They asked questions no one wanted to answer. An internal investigation was launched, but it led nowhere. Mistakes were acknowledged, but no one was held responsible. Files were closed. Careers continued. Detective Reynolds remained on the force, but the case followed him. He later admitted that the investigation had been rushed, narrowed too quickly, and influenced by pressure that should never exist in the pursuit of justice. Years passed. No new charges were filed. No new suspects named. Officially, the case was over. But for those who lived in that town, the memory never left. Every quiet street, every closed door, every familiar face carried a reminder of what happens when the system protects itself instead of the truth. Emily Carter never received justice. And her story is not unique. Across the country, cases like hers exist, where evidence disappears, voices are ignored, and verdicts bring closure to the court, but not to the people. This is what it looks like when justice fails. Not loudly, but quietly. If stories like this matter to you, remember the names they try to forget, and question the systems we're told to trust.